This is Poland, a booming economy in Eastern Europe that is projected to overtake Germany by 2040 in terms of GDP per capita. The Polish economy gained strength in 2017 and 2018, slowed in 2019, and contracted in 2020. Growth resumed in 2021. Economic freedom has trended upward over those 5 years. Fiscal health, monetary freedom, trade freedom, and investment freedom are the strengths of this country. According to an Ernst & Young report, Poland ranks 7th in the world in terms of investment attractiveness. Poland is one of the key immigration destinations in the EU, having attracted more non-EU immigrants than any other EU country for a few consecutive years. Now Poland has a promising outlook, but it was not always that smooth. Let's dive into the economic history of this beautiful country. Before World War II, Poland was a free market economy based largely upon agriculture. After the initiation of communist rule in the 1940s, the country developed an increasingly industrial, state-run command economy based on the Soviet model. It joined the rigid framework of Comecon, Council on Mutual Economic Assistance, an organization of communist countries led by the Soviet Union. This is the same alliance that we mentioned in our video about the economic rise of Vietnam. Do watch that video if you haven't seen it. From the mid-1970s, the Polish economy struggled with limited growth, largely as a result of an archaic industrial infrastructure, government subsidies that shielded inefficient production, and wages that were artificially high to keep the economy running. These all measures were a perfect recipe for disaster. In the late 1980s, a swelling government deficit and hyperinflation brought about economic crisis. 1980s is also referred to as the lost decade for Poland, as no significant economic growth took place. With the fall of communism and the demise of Comecon, the Polish economy became increasingly involved in the market-oriented global system, for which it was ill-suited. Poland tried to transition into a complete market economy very rapidly. This sudden shock wasn't very well received by the Polish economy. To try to achieve economic stability, the post-communist government introduced an approach known as shock therapy, which sought both to control inflation and to expedite Poland's transition to a market economy. As part of that plan, the government froze wages, removed price controls, phased out subsidies to state-owned enterprises, and permitted large-scale private enterprise. As a result, in the early 1990s, industrial output and GDP dropped significantly. The loss further widened as a result of the fall in agricultural production, largely because of a devastating drought. Unemployment grew, affecting as many as 1 in 7 Poles. Inflation, however, began to drop, from 250% in 1990 to 10% in 2000. The 1990s decade saw the economy rebound. Production and GDP also recorded dramatic turnarounds, with an average annual GDP growth of about 4% from 1990 to 2000. Poland's balance of payments improved partly as the result of debt forgiveness, and the country developed one of the leading economies of the former Eastern Bloc, as well as one of the fastest growing in Europe. Unemployment, which had been high at the beginning of the decade, righted itself in the late 1990s, falling to levels similar to those in Western Europe, around 10%. The growth accelerated during the 2000s to such an extent that the Polish economy continued to expand even during the 2008 global financial crisis, when Poland was the only European country whose economy did not slip into recession. During the period of communist rule, remarkable advances in industrial production were overshadowed to some extent by shortcomings in quality and by problems of organization. Industrial output fell dramatically after the demise of communism, especially during the first years of shock therapy. There were declines of 1/3 or more in almost all areas of manufacturing and mining following the freeing of prices and the collapse of Comecon. As Polish industry began to downsize, however, production improved, and by the mid-1990s manufacturing accounted for about 2/5 of GDP. As other sectors grew more quickly, manufacturing totaled about 1/5 of GDP by the end of the decade. Now, an important ingredient to become a market economy is to reduce the inefficient state-owned industries. Let's discuss how this process took place in Poland. Privatization of some of Poland's large industries proved to be a slow process. This is partly the reason that Poland did not see the rise in the numbers of oligarchs, as happened in Russia. The Polish government resources were evenly distributed. Under communism, the principal branches of industry, services, and trade were directly owned by the state. After the fall of communism, both industry and agriculture became increasingly privatized. By the early 1990s, more than half the Polish economy was in private ownership, while more than 4/5 of Polish shops were privately owned. The privatization of larger enterprises was more complicated. A number of these were transformed into joint stock and limited liability companies. To distribute ownership in them, the mass privatization program was introduced in 1994, which created 15 national investment funds to serve as joint stock companies for more than 500 large and medium-sized firms that were privatized. Poles were able to purchase shares in these funds at a nominal price. Listed on the Warsaw Stock Exchange, the NIFs comprised a broad range of enterprises, not just individual companies or groups of companies, and this enabled citizens to possess a diversified interest in key Polish industries. By 2001, more than 6,800 state-owned enterprises had been involved in the privatization process, and the private sector accounted for more than 70% of GDP. According to some estimates, by 2012 the private sector's portion of GDP had increased to between 80 and 85%. Poland has the largest private sector in Eastern Europe. As it made the transition to private ownership and the market economy, Poland became increasingly involved with international economic and political organizations. In 1991 it joined the Council of Europe. In 1995 it became a member of the World Trade Organization, and in 1996 it joined the OECD. It gained full membership in NATO in 1999, along with Hungary and the Czech Republic. An associate member of the European Union since 1994, Poland ascended to full membership in 2004. Though Poland joined the EU, it never adopted the euro. After joining the EU in 2004, Poland prepared to enter the EU's economic zone and to adopt the euro as its currency. However, into the 2010s the Law and Justice Party continued to work against Poland adopting the euro, arguing that the country's standard of living was not yet comparable to that of the zone's strongest members and that Poland was better served by maintaining its own currency, the zloty. Joining the European Union was one of the most important phases of Polish economic history. The membership provided Poland the access to the world's most lucrative trading bloc. Poland had lower wages as compared to other developed West European countries, hence it attracted a lot of investment. The country was able to capitalize on its location as the geographical center of Europe. More than 74% of the $230 billion of Polish exports head to the fellow EU members. While 64% of the imports of $228 billion are also sourced from other EU countries. Machinery, metals, textiles and clothing, coal, and food account for the bulk of exports, and machinery, chemicals, and fuels are the major imports. Germany is the largest market for almost all categories of exports, while Russia remains by far the most important source of energy imports, and Germany and Italy serve as the chief sources of foreign machinery and chemicals. Foreign direct investment (FDI) was at 40% of GDP in 2010, a doubling over the level in 2000. Most FDI into Poland comes from France, Germany and the Netherlands. All of these countries are EU members. Polish firms in turn have foreign investments primarily in Italy and Luxembourg. Most of the internal FDI is in manufacturing, which makes it susceptible to economic fluctuations in the source countries. EU funds have played the role of a game changer in Poland. Poland is the largest beneficiary of EU funding. Between 2007 and 2013 our country received over €67 billion from the EU's budget. So far we're disposed over 85% of these funds, for example new roads, airports, motorways, modernization of the rural areas and the country's eastern regions. Poland, through 7 national and 17 regional programs, benefited from EU funding of €91.3 billion under the 2014 to 2020 ESIF programs. Developments require funding. Many countries have great potential and untapped resources, however, lack of funding restricts their scope of improvement. No doubt, EU funding altered the course of Polish economy. Now let's talk some current scenario. When we talk about current affairs, how can we miss COVID and the Ukraine crisis? Poland was initially doing really well with the COVID vaccinations as it vaccinated over 45% of the population by the mid of 2021. However, since then this figure has only climbed to 58%. The ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict rings the emergency alarm in Warsaw. Poland shares a land border with the Russian region of Kaliningrad. Polish government has been really nervous regarding this conflict as they refused to supply Ukraine with Soviet jets, in exchange for US-made F-16s. This move showed that they didn't want to anger Russia by supplying arms to Ukraine and incite a new crisis in Europe. Future of the Polish economy. So, overall Polish economy has been remarkable all these years. It has transitioned from being a relatively unimportant communist country in Eastern Europe, to a booming economy often touted as the growth engine of European Union. The privatization of Polish state-owned industries and joining the EU was a turning point for the country. The introduction of shock therapy was also significant to the Polish economy, which introduced the country to freer market system. Initially, the people suffered as the currency devalued and unemployment rose, however those reforms proved to be fundamental to Poland's growth. Poland was one of the fastest growing economies worldwide pre-COVID crisis and has been the fastest growing economy in post-crisis Europe. The last 26 years have showed a huge potential in Polish economy. Its GDP doubled in size during this period. However, all is not good. There are many issues that Poland will likely face in future. The most prominent one is Poland's population is aging more rapidly than that of any other European country. 35% of the population will be over 65 by 2030, according to the World Bank. This situation is expected to further tighten the labor force. The demographic shift could significantly strain the healthcare and pension systems. Another major issue is that Poland is not keeping up with the rapid pace of technological change occurring globally. To be competitive, the country must incorporate technology into its approaches for sustainable and inclusive growth. Poland also has the worst air quality in Europe. Poland has 33 of the 50 most polluted cities in Europe. Households in poorer urban areas experience worse air quality than other areas. So, here this video comes to an end. We hope that you enjoyed this walk through the economic history of Poland. Do leave a like if you found this video to be interesting. Comment down your suggestions and share our videos. Subscribe to stay updated. Till then, goodbye.